Good morning, Bucknutters. It is Tuesday, February 21st, 2023. I am Dan Rubin. This is the Bucknuts Morning 5 and Change. We are rotating our guests all Tuesdays, all off-season. Today, the lovely and talented Steve Helwagen joins us. Steve, with a 2017 Glory poster behind him. I have some of my own here, as you can tell here. Look at that one. That is a keeper. But we're going to talk some football, talk some basketball. I know that will not please some of you, but we must do our due diligence here. Steve, the sun is shining in Ohio. It's a miracle.
Yeah, the rain is kind of pushing out here in central Ohio. It's supposed to be today kind of choppy, 65 degrees, and I think 71 or 72 here in a day or two. So yeah, it's going to be crazy. I was in Hilton Head last week. It was actually nicer in Columbus, I think, one day than when I was in Hilton Head. But glad to be back in Ohio and glad to be back at it this week. And spring football coming up here in a couple of weeks. They'll start out. I think it's March 6th or 7th, whatever the first day is, and get right to it.
We're kind of in a limbo time here. And rest assured, those of you coveting Ohio weather, the schedule, the forecast 71 for tomorrow or the next day, and then like 42 for the day after that. So we'll all be ill and standard. We want to talk today about, we're just going to pick kind of not a random topic, but an interesting one, and that is running back. Just because we've talked about kind of the more obvious, I think, competitions or let's say air quotes holes on the roster. I don't think anybody questions the total talent in the running back room, but how it's going to look is anybody's guess. Good Lord, how it looked in the championship, the semifinals, as opposed to how it looked in camp. It was like, an FBI operation, man. There was guys in there you never barely even heard of, walk-ons and transfers, and you really don't expect a team of Ohio State's caliber to be going to a walk-on and a transfer in such a big game, but they are back. I find it to be a pretty interesting situation. Mayan Williams came back. There was some thought he might, boogie. Travion Henderson had to come back by age, but very rare you see a running back have a year like he had 2 years ago and followed up with a tough year. So who's going to be in the room? Set the depth chart for us if Steve Helwagen was the coach.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's always been dictated, at least this past year, was dictated by who's available.
Yeah.
That was the big thing. And what was weird was Travion Henderson would play an entire game one week and Mayan Williams would be out. And then the next week you'd show up at the game and Travion isn't warming up and Mayan's out there warming up and he would play the whole game. And then the following week, Travion Henderson would be out there and he'd play the whole game and Mayan Williams was out. It was quite a saga from week to week over who was available and who wasn't. And then finally they get to Maryland and Henderson and Williams are both not available. And here comes the freshman, Dallin Hayden. I guess he had a 100-yard game against Indiana as well the week before, but huge game at Maryland, 100 yards. Then they hardly play him. They play Chip Trayanum for reasons that remain unclear against Michigan. Had Dallin Hayden had the same opportunities Chip Trayanum had against Michigan, he probably had a couple long touchdowns because they blocked it pretty well, and Trayanum just didn't have the burst to finish it. So that was interesting. And then you get into the bowl game, and it was kind of a mix of Hayden and Trayanum. And, Williams tried to give it a go, but just couldn't. He scored a touchdown early in the game. I don't think he ever played again. So, yeah, it's just a really weird thing.
Xavier Johnson got in there.
Yeah, Xavier Johnson looked good in there as well. And he's pretty good hybrid player, could play any one of several positions. So I think that you consider him part of that mix as well as a changeup back. But I think Travion Henderson is the one if he's healthy, just because he can do so many things. And they really didn't throw him the ball as much out of the backfield this past year as they did the year before. But I'd like to see a little bit more of that, particularly with the young quarterback, that he can just dump it off and get out of the way. So I think the running backs are going to have to play a much bigger role. The running game is going to have to play a much bigger role this year with a younger quarterback. And I think Travion Henderson's number one just because he can do so many different things. And Mayan Williams, he's earned his spot. As far as I'm concerned, that guy deserves his carries. And I don't look at it that he's taking carries away from Travion Henderson. I look at it that he's restaurant quality. He deserves to play as well. And then Dallin Hayden, I mean, that guy got in there and all he did was punish people and never backed down from the challenge as you thought maybe a freshman would. So I think he deserves a spot. Evan Pryor, we don't know. You just don't know what you have with him. He's never been healthy. And then Chip Trayanum, I would put back there at 4 or 5 probably. I just don't see how you play him over any of the other ones if they are healthy. He just doesn't have that kind of burst. Maybe he's your short yardage guy. I don't know. But you've already got Mayan Williams, who kind of excels at that. So moving the pile type thing. But I want to see them use the running back position better, if that makes any sense, which includes more running opportunities and throwing the ball to those guys out of the backfield. And Xavier Johnson, my goodness, that would be 6. He definitely should be back there on occasion as well because he can house one at any moment if they block it properly. So I'm bullish on Ohio State this year, Dan. I don't know why. They've got 10 guys who are in a contract year for the NFL. They could have 7, 8 guys taken in the first 2 or 3 rounds in the following year's draft. So that's a lot of talent right there. And I want to see how it all comes together this year.
I'm equally bullish. This is just we're borderline nitpicking here, but Evan Pryor is the one we just don't know anything about in terms of a recruit. He was according to the rankings, he'd be the second highest rated guy in the room, and expectations were pretty high. Don't forget, he's the reason Donovan Edwards does not attend the Ohio State University. We've all heard of that dude. So I do think it's going to be a very interesting thing to watch. I will say the most incredulous I was about the running back situation all season was the game at Northwestern when they just never put Hayden in the game. I think it was Mayan who played hurt the whole game.
Yep.
There's something with Dallin Hayden that we were not told or don't know about. Either it could be something as simple as they don't trust him in pass protection, or he couldn't remember the plays or something. But in terms of what we saw on the field, there were a couple instances when the Northwestern game was hairy. If you guys remember, it was played in a monsoon. We couldn't throw the ball, and we couldn't run it, and he had the burst we needed, and he didn't get in there. So there's stuff to the running back room that we don't know in terms of why guys played. Like you said, Chip Trayanum playing is a mystery, wrapped in a riddle, trapped in an enigma. That's hard to explain. You really don't expect Ohio State to be in a situation they were in the fourth quarter against Georgia with the guy who was not recruited to play running back at Ohio State ever touching the ball. So,
yeah, I think you make a good point on Hayden. I think it had to do with pass protection in particular, as well as, excuse me, we don't get to watch them practice, but obviously the coaches know what the guys do in practice. If he'd been a fumbler in practice, perhaps that was what they were worried about, but he never once, to my recollection, fumbled in a game. Now, obviously that game, the bulk of his work was Indiana and Maryland. So
Toledo too, he crushed.
Yeah, Toledo.
But you're right. Yeah, you're right. There was nothing there was nothing like we discussed as a staff or anyone saw that was like obvious. So it'll be interesting. I will say this: that's going to be a room to watch. Not to be negative, next offseason for the portal, because I can't see everybody sticking around if they don't think they're going to be the man at some point, given the way things work out. All right. Let's take this question from Michael Colwell. We are not going to be able to do a podcast without a Kyle and Devin and Kyle, Ruby and Max kind of discussion here. Mike Colwell, quick question for Steve. Who do you believe the starting quarterback will be? And we went over our starting running back. Our guy here is going with Mayan Williams and Kyle McCord.
Well, it's just staying with the running back. I mean, it could well be Mayan Williams if Travion Henderson, for whatever reason, isn't all the way back or whatever. But I just think when they've had both of them at full health, they have pushed Henderson ahead of Williams. That was kind of the staff's inclination, and I don't know why you would go back on that. I just think Henderson allows you to do so many more things and is so much more explosive. I mean, if it's 1st and 10 on your own 25 after a kickoff, he could take the next play
Oh,
75
absolutely.
yards. I mean, there's just no two ways about that. Mayan, unless you're playing Youngstown State, is probably not going to do that. So, which I like Mayan. I'm not
Oh, yeah.
anti-Mayan in any way, shape, or form. And again, starting, this whole starting thing, other than the quarterback position, starting is kind of in the offensive line, generally you want 5 offensive linemen and 1 quarterback. But to me, everybody else can be pretty well fluid and
Especially at Ohio State, where your depth
rotate.
chart should be legit.
Yeah. So back on quarterback, I am a big Kyle McCord guy. I think that in the limited chances that we've seen out of him, he's done really well. Obviously, never put in a situation under the gun in 2 years. I mean, you can't really count Akron because after the first or second series, once he'd had his feet wet, it was Katie bar the door, after that. So to me, I think that he's the guy just because he's got the extra year in the system, but don't discount Devin Brown in any way, shape, or form.
Mm-hmm.
He's an outstanding player as well. Unfortunately, we don't get to watch a lot of what's going to happen this spring to know behind closed doors who's really making those inroads. We have to kind of look around the edges and ask people kind of on the sly, like, what are you seeing? What are you hearing? And I think that it's going to be a great battle. But I don't think that Ryan Day is going to sandbag one or the other or announce one or the other anytime before he has to. I think McCord's going to be that guy, but it could take a while getting from point A to point B.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think, like you said, we have enough evidence to even really have a developed discussion on. I mean, you may have a vibe as a fan on who you like better based on what you saw, but really, Kyle McCord, how many times was he put in there to cut it loose against a real opponent? I mean,
Really wasn't.
I don't have a huge reservoir of memories on that. I tend to watch the game, so we shall see on that. They're both highly recruited guys. There's no difference in their recruitment or kind of their physical makeup. There's not a one towering over the other or anything like that. So it should be interesting. Certainly nice to have the ability to add quarterbacks the way they do. If anybody has earned the benefit of the doubt at a position, it is Ryan Day and the quarterback position, given they now have a templated seat at the Heisman Trophy ceremony. And it hasn't been just one guy. If you give them Joe Burrow as even a, kind of a contributor to, you're talking about 4 guys in the last 3 to 4 years. So that's quite tempting, and it's consistent. I wouldn't say Haskins, Fields, and CJ have a ton in common in play style either. So he's shown he can do it. We're going to take.
They sent a defensive back or end up there as well. So it is high. It's Heisman Central. Just haven't won one. Need to bring that trophy home.
I mean, literally, had Nick Bosa been healthy his entire junior year, for that matter, I think he would have been there as well. So there's no question. There's a pipeline to the Heisman ceremony. I can show you our expenses to prove that. But anyway, seriously.
But I digress.
That's a good expense that Ohio State has that say some other schools do not. Some other sites don't have to worry about. But yes, we digress. Okay. I'm trying to think if we should even take another football question before we go into the autopsy here. But we will do one just because it is Bucknuts. Darren Dorsey, beautiful first name, I might add. I have questions about which receivers will leave if they don't get much run this year. I believe some young guys coming in will push upper classes hard. Who may bolt? I don't think we want to sit here and say names, but obviously Carnell Tate and Brandon Ennis are high-profile guys coming in. You join the 2 top receivers in the nation coming back, and another guy who's third was at one point in time the highest-rated receiver in high school. What do you think?
Yeah, that's a great question because they took 4 receivers who were freshmen this past year, and now 4 or 5 coming in this year. So that's 9 guys in their first or second year on campus. And it's impossible to play that many guys, particularly when we saw Hartline really didn't sub in for his big 3 much at all. I mean, Harrison, Egbuka, and Fleming were out there quite a bit. Xavier Johnson got some run. maybe when one of them was down, if Fleming in particular missed some time. So uh, that is a tremendous question. I think if anybody out of that group of 9 doesn't get to play much, they would be susceptible to looking around, particularly if they were a second year guy, one of those, of that Antwi, uh, Caleb
Yep.
Brown, that whole group. And I'm not saying those guys in particular, but they were part of a 4-man class of wide receivers. Was Kion Grays? Is that one
Kion
of the?
Grace, Arizona. Oh yeah.
Yeah. So, Jared Burton, I think was the other one.
Yep.
So, excuse me, I hit a cough there. But so if one of those 4 guys doesn't get on the field much, you might think, maybe. But the opportunity is there the following 2 or 3 years. It'd be wide open for anybody who puts the time in and shows the work ethic Marvin Harrison Jr. shows you the blueprint. If you want to be as good as Marvin Harrison Jr. and make as much money as Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to make, you need to show up when Marvin Harrison Jr. gets there in the morning.
Yep.
You need to follow him like a puppy dog, and you need to stay late and do the jugs gun like Marvin Harrison Jr. does. I wouldn't say every day, but quite a few days. That guy puts in so much extra time and extra effort. And guess what? It translates on Saturdays. What do you know? Like the what was it? The Hangover. Ta-da!
Yeah.
It's like what
Hello.
what is the shock here? The guy who works the hardest is the best player. What do you
It
know?
helps. His genetics don't hurt. Let's be honest.
Exactly.
But I agree with you. Here's what's interesting. Maybe at Ohio State, you could make the argument that the guys who are getting passed on the depth chart should not transfer, because if you look, the guys who have stuck it out at Ohio State, the obvious example being Terry McLaurin. Terry McLaurin never took a snap at Ohio State as a top 2 receiver. He just didn't. That was the depth chart, and he's making plenty of dough. So if you stick with it at Ohio State, even Julian Fleming.
Yep.
There was more talk about Fleming transferring than anything else for his first few years. If he has a great year this year, he's going to get drafted in the first few rounds. So
if he stays healthy, he's going to be an NFL player. So
those who stay will be rewarded. You're not playing for a fly-by-night coach.
It's the Heartline pipeline.
So I would be very I'd be real sure before you transfer, because I'd also be, if I was picking players and you went to Ohio State and left, besides Jameson Williams, I get it. He was buried, unfortunately, and it's just so ridiculous that they had Jackson Smith and Jigba as the number 3 receiver at one point anyway. So that's I don't even know how to put that in perspective. So Jameson Williams leaving, I get, but if you do stick it out, even if you aren't a frontline guy, Paris Campbell's still collecting checks. He's going to get another contract. Terry McLaurin, I think, might make the most of them all. So, and let's just say Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave, you'd like to be their accountant. Okay. So shed no tears for our wide receiver room. And I say that before we take a break and come back and talk about basketball. Let me check my time here, 18:30. All right, Steve, we have crossed it and topped it, broken it down, and it's not good. The basketball team is struggling.
Not good, Bob.
I mentioned to you before the show that you were trying to come up with new and creative statistics from the media guide to put the losing streaks in perspective. We've head back to eras that have names of people only a few of us remember. When it started to go bad, I really did think they were going to pull out of it to some extent. And it really does feel like they're just cratering on some level. I feel like when I watch the games that the coaches are kind of like throwing stuff at the wall at times and just, and I don't know if that's the coaches or the players lacking consistency. But here's the question I have for you. Would this all be solved had Malachi Branham returned to Ohio State?
Well, certainly it would have changed everything because he's a guy that people would have had to stilt their defense toward. So it would have made life so much easier for Bryce Sensabaugh, for Justice Suing, for Zed Key, those guys, and the point guard. Bruce Thornton. I think that would have been a really dynamic starting five. Where they don't have anybody right now is the two guard, which is where Branham played. I mean, they've played Sean McNeil and Roddy Gale there, trying to get anything they can, squeeze anything they can out of those two guys. But and it looks like now that the season is completely a total. I mean, it's like the insurance adjuster says, it's a total loss. I mean,
Yeah.
you're going to total it far. I mean, it's there's no
Get
sending
a
it to
new
the
one.
body shop. I mean, the best case scenario for this team really is a 2-2 finish here in the regular season. I think that Penn State actually had lost 4 games recently and then just won 2 games. I think they beat Illinois at home and won at Minnesota.
I watched some of that.
So, or I don't know,
That's
something
right.
like that. At any rate, that's a winnable game Thursday night against Penn State. They're not a world beater. Then you play Illinois and Maryland at home, and you just hope that maybe you can eke one of those out. You played Maryland pretty close on the road without Zed Key.
They're not
And
as good on the road.
Yeah, then the last game is at Michigan State. You can forget about that one. That's that. All 3 of those teams, Illinois, Maryland, and Michigan State, and even Penn State to a small degree, are still playing to try to get in the NCAA tournament. I mean, Penn State's pretty much got to win out at this point. I mean, they could afford maybe one more loss, but if they can get to 20 wins, somehow they might be a team worth looking at. But at any rate, coming back to the beginning of this, they're playing the young guys now, I think, out of preparing for next year, which I think is a prudent move. It doesn't help a whole lot in the short term. It's not, it's going to be hard to beat some of these teams with some of the young guys taking heavy minutes because, say what you will about McNeil, he can at least make a few shots. Likely, I don't know that playing him at all at this point really helps the bottom line. I don't even know what he gives you at this point. Yeah, it's a messy situation. It went downhill, obviously, with the Zed Key injury. The first game against Purdue, they are 1-13 beginning with that game, and he obviously tried to play hurt, was nowhere near as effective as he had been, and this is the mess that they're in. And roster construction didn't have an extra big man to throw in there, and they don't have, as I've said several times, the Coleman Hawkins player, the 6'9" guy with length, who can go to the basket, get you a bucket, or step out and hit a 3. They ain't got that guy. So, and get deflections and rebounds and, kind of do all the little things. He's not an All-American player, but he's just a good player. They don't have that. So, it's every time they take the floor, it seems like everybody's looking up at the guy that they're guarding and giving away 2 inches. And, in the Big Ten, you ain't going to win many games doing that.
No. You bring up a good point. The Big Ten is a huge league, by the way. As someone who is, just trust me, everyone there is enormous. But
Dan, what does it say, just to interject, McNeil and Likely were decent players statistically at their last stop, and they come to the Big Ten. They really can't do much of anything. I mean, McNeil has 3 double-digit games here in the last couple of weeks, which he's come on. Likely has never found the niche at Ohio State. And, of course, he missed the 2-3 weeks there in December when he had to go home. But he's been back a month and a half and still.
Yeah, but did you ever have – Likely wasn't even – he wasn't even a great player at Oklahoma State. He didn't –
Yeah.
He's not – you can see he's just so limited. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You're adding guys to the team who literally can't shoot or can't dribble or something. You know what I'm saying? They have a major flaw. It looked to me like the last game, I was feeling for Justice Suing, man. He was trying to be the man. He's just not the man.
No.
The problem when you lose a guy like Malachi Branham is sometimes one, and that's why I brought it up because it's my opinion, sometimes one guy can affect your roster so much. Like, keep this in mind. If Malachi Branham was here, Bryce Sensabaugh wouldn't have had the need to be who he is. He'd probably be coming back next year. Yeah. So you create this hole, and now who are you going to – like Bryce Sensabaugh, let me tell you something. That guy can score, okay? He has got a gift. There are not many people built like that who watch when the ball leaves his hands, man. You think it's going in. You know what I mean? He's got something to him. Now, does he know how to play defense yet? No. Is he a little bit, out of shape because he's probably carrying 15 pounds he shouldn't? Yes. But you're not even going to get the benefit of that next year because he's gone, man. I don't care what anyone tells me. Once your name shows up in a lottery mock draft before January 1st, you are gone. We can't
Yeah.
run stats on that, but I'm sure it would be there. So then what? Some of the guys that got on the bench, like Etzler, he's gone. Bowen Hardman, he's not going to play here. So
Yeah. Etzler
what's
and
he going to
Hardman
do?
can't
Like, he
play.
is in trouble, man. Like,
It-
I think Chris Holtman is a good coach, but I'm wondering where's the rope to grab onto?
Yeah. When they're, losing games by 20 points and whatever, and Etzler and Hardman can't even get a minute at the end, excuse me, that'll tell you what Holtman thinks about their long term viability to help this team. And so I think what they're looking at is what Illinois went through. They lost Curbelo, he transferred out.
Yep.
Grandison, didn't he transfer
Yep.
maybe to Duke? Does that sound right? Is he at
Yep.
Duke this year? And a couple other guys who are really good players transferred out of there as well. It was like that guy, Frank, I call him Frank the Tank Underwood. I know his name's Brad, but I call him Frank the Tank. He's combustible. He's a hard guy to play for. He burns you out pretty good.
Sure does.
So, if you can't take that hard coaching, you're not going to stay there and play for him. Coleman Hawkins is a guy who accepts it, and you got to believe that kid in practice has got to be. Frank the Tank is on him pretty hard for
his
some of
point
his.
guard's from Ohio, by the way. Sincere's up there. So if he can handle it, that's another miss.
Any rate, I think they're looking at an Illinois type reset, and that's not all bad. Illinois went out and got Terrence Shannon, Dane Danger, and Michael Mayer.
Yep.
And they're three of the probably top 20, 25 players in the Big Ten this year. Sure. So if Ohio State can go out, you figure you've got the one with Bruce Thornton, and you've got Tyson Chapman coming in to help you play the one, and he's a pretty good scorer.
Mm-hmm.
The two guard, they say it's Roddy Gale, but I'm not sold.
I'm not sold on Gale.
Yeah, not sold because he doesn't shoot the three very well.
What does he do? He's a decent defender. He's a decent athlete. He's a decent shooter.
He's going to have to work at it.
You have to have a skill, man. What are you giving me? Are you a rebounder? At least McNeil can hit an open three, and so you can run something for him.
Yeah, Royal to me seems like he'd be a three. I don't know. I think he's undersized to play the four, and
definitely. So in the Big Ten,
what they need is probably an impact two and an impact who can make threes because they don't have anybody that can make them, and an impact four, somebody who can come in and play right away. As I've said, a 6'8", 6'9" guy who does everything, a very good player. If they get two really good players out of the portal, and I'm not talking about role players. I'm not talking about guys who can only do one thing. Right. All I can do is shoot. I'm Jamari Wheeler. All I can do is defend, kind of. Not talking about that. They don't have enough guys that can defend on this roster.
See, the problem is, though, the transfer portal is not the panacea some think it is. You know what I'm saying? Yes, there is the occasional guy who went to a lower level, should have been at a higher level, and can come to you and thrive. But Oklahoma State shed no tears when likely came here. You know what I'm saying? So even West Virginia, I mean, this is Sean's second stop on third. He was at Sinclair down the street from me before that. So
Tanner Holden is an example. Like, he didn't even play in the game the other day against Purdue. Like, he's completely played his way out of the rotation entirely. I mean, what does he come back? I mean, what? And if he does, what does he even give you? I don't know. He's had one meaningful moment. He hit that shot to win the game.
It was illegal.
It was not a legal play, although they got jobbed. What was it, the Minnesota game? They called the foul on Thornton. It wasn't a foul. But so it kind of cuts both ways. But, I don't know. He needs – Holdman, in my opinion, has 1 year. And that's it because of the buyout. I think a $15 to $18 million buyout this year is not palatable for Ohio State after the COVID debt.
Does it change next year?
Next year, it's NCAA or bust. If they don't make the NCAA tournament, he's got to go. And, it's just the fact of the matter. And That means they got to go hit the pavement pretty hard this spring to go get some guys.
I'm trying to think. I mean, you'd have to get a real impact transfer. Those guys just don't really exist, man. Here's the thing: they need a transfer. They're going to need a transfer to come in and be the main guy. Who's the main guy? Like Sensabaugh at least has somewhat of a number one player's game. Who is the number one guy? Like when you need a bucket, who are you going to besides Sensabaugh? Good Lord.
They don't
So
have it. They do not have that.
I think they're in real trouble, man. I mean, I like Chris Holtman. I think he's a good coach. I don't know if it's the approach or look, there's some things have changed in college basketball. Your ability to use the portal, your ability to recruit, and the NIL and stuff. So what was successful 5 or 6 years ago may not be successful now, man. You may have to change stuff up because it does not.
I think Royal can be a Sensabaugh light. I mean, I don't envision him averaging 16 points a game.
Yeah.
I would think if he can get you 9 or 10 points a game, I think that'd be pretty good for him. I think he's a guy that can be put in some situations like that. Scotty Middleton, reading these box scores of these big prep school games, he's not a big scorer. No. He's more of a glue guy at the 3. You've already got, not much of a scorer glue guy with Gale. I mean, Chapman can light it up. I mean, I think he's a guy, maybe like a Dwayne Washington lead guard type guy. I need the ball in my hands, guys. Get out of my way type thing. I think Chapman is going to bring some electricity at times, but they're just freshmen. And it's the Big Ten conference. It's like this is caps and sleeves here, guys. Caps and sleeves. So
listen, it's harder to. I do think it's harder to make it. That's what makes Sensabaugh so impressive to me. Is the Big Ten is a hard league to be in as a freshman because it's a bruising league, man. The change from high school to college is not a height or skill thing. It's a physicality thing. Like you're an 18, 19-year-old. You're playing against some Isaac. How old is Isaac Likely? 30? You're playing against grown men out there. Seriously.
Do you know?
I mean, you can get by with strength and I don't know, man. I think they're in real trouble. I did not think that when this started. You said 1-13. When you said that out loud, good Lord, it felt like he kicked me in the nuts.
Yeah, it's bad.
1-13 is not a professional, is just not a reasonable, acceptable output at any point in time for an Ohio State in any sport. Synchronized swimming, I learned yesterday in my daughter's official tour, is our best sport. We've won more national championships in synchronized, but 1-13?
Yeah.
Come on, man. That's nuts. Northwestern in a bad year.
It is. I'm doing a survey for a column, and 65 Power 5 conference schools. Would you believe as many as 39 of them, 39 of the 65, have had a 20-loss season in the last 15 seasons?
Wow.
And that's like Boston College has done it 5 times. Wake Forest has done it 4 times. There's a few others that have done it 4 times. They have 20-loss seasons. Ohio State right now is on the doorstep of something like that. Ohio State's only had 3 of those in the last 50 years. Of course, prior to that, they didn't play enough games to lose 20 games, but Ohio State's done it 3 times in 50 years. But Ohio State, obviously, you look at it hasn't had one in the last 15. But what I'm getting at is just this Big Ten. You watch these games, and you get to about the 30-minute mark of these games, and everybody looks like they've run a marathon.
Yep.
And the pace slows to a complete slog, and everyone is beaten down, worn out. And any points that you get in the final 10 minutes of a Big Ten game are well-earned points because they allow them to just beat the living hell out of one another. And it's physicality away from the ball. I mean, they've had 2 games this year where the teams combined for 44 points in the first half. One of them was that I think it was Wisconsin-Illinois slog fest there on a Sunday. I was driving back from Indiana that weekend, and you just look at that and you're like, how can any of this be legal defense? Because how is this even possible? The 2 Division I Big Ten teams would combine for 44 points in a first half. That's 88 for the game. That just it doesn't add up. But
it's a hard watch. That's another thing about this team. They're a hard watch. You know what I'm saying? It's like there have been young, scrappy teams that don't have a great record that you like enjoy. Like they're getting
bad fundamentals.
It's just Yeah, and the coaches are gripping, and yeah, it's a tough situation. This one guy took a shot at us here. I'm going to let him. Apparently, we don't know what we're talking about. George Cameron, LOL. I think that means he's laughing out loud. You guys
Doesn't play
don't know
fast.
anything.
Doesn't
Chip is
play
actually the
fast.
fastest running back. Ask Coach J. Y'all do just be talking. Well,
Doesn't play fast. You know, I think he would play
time out
fast.
before we go any further. Are you saying Chip Trayanum was faster than Travion Henderson?
I
Travion
suppose.
Henderson won the 100 in Virginia.
Well, Chip 20 pounds ago was. When he was at Arizona State, he probably was, but he put on 20 pounds to play linebacker. He's not anymore, George. He's not anymore. He didn't show it. I think if he repped running back and got his body back, dropped 10 pounds, got his body back where it should be to play running back, he might be one of the faster backs they have. But at his weight, 230 pounds, he certainly was not. So, are we talking Chip Trayanum 2 years ago? Or are we talking Chip Trayanum today, bro?
George, we love all our fans, especially those from Akron.
Love you, George.
We appreciate everybody stopping by. Hope you like the kvetching on the hoops. And season will go on. Steve will be there. Have a good one, Bucknutters.